Patreon. Attack on Titan over maybe the last 2 years, but really most recently, is finally getting the respect I think its popularity stole from it in 2013. I remember on my old channel before it got deleted earlier this month, I made a video in January of this year called Attack on Titan Overrated ? And it seems that nearly a year later, that monumental hot take at the time is generally accepted. And I was fully on board with all this praise. I loved the validation I got as it seemed I was being proven right. But this freight train of praise has continued with chapters 120 and 121 and I'm just not feeling it. Chapters 120 and 121 have not been as good in my opinion as chapters 91 through 119 that I thought had dwarfed everything that had come before it. And I've boiled this down to a single disconnect I think I'm having between myself and the majority. Chapters 118 and 119, which I think are the best chapters of manga that maybe I've ever read, focus more on the characters, which is what I like most about this series, and chapters 120 and 121 focus on the grander plot reveals that everyone else seems to care the most about. These two chapters focus on very few characters, namely only the Jaeger trio, and most of the interest comes from the plot reveals, whereas I think Attack on Titan's strength, especially post-time skip, is its dynamic and wide cast of constantly moving characters. What I would prefer is for us to go back to cutting between all these different characters around Shinganshina. I want to see Falco's reaction to becoming a Titan shifter and his brother's death. I want to see Mikasa and Armin's reaction to Gabi decapitating Eren. What are Pieck and Magarth doing right now? Are we going to get a proper look at Nile and Pixis' Titans? Where is Kiyomi right now, and what's the state of that plane? Have Mikasa and Jean made out yet? What's going on with Hanji and Levi? Is he alive? Is Eren the father? Knowing what we know now, why would he be? If it wasn't him, then who was it? Is Annie back yet? These things are all vastly more interesting to me than whatever the fuck Grisha thought about before killing the Race family. Or whether or not Eren has been fucking with history the entire time, or the euthanasia plan, or the possibility of the rumbling. These things are just a setting to see how our characters react, and I don't care about them by themselves. I really don't understand why we care about any of this, especially when we could be spending our time with our characters. When it came out, I was proclaiming chapter 118 to be the best chapter of manga I'd ever read. More so than any singular chapter in Berserk or Vinland Saga or Devilman. Not only that, I thought chapter 119 was damn near on the same level with probably the best cliffhanger we'd seen yet. My excitement for chapter 120 was the highest it had ever been before for an upcoming chapter. I've been reading this series for 5 years. When I caught up, Hans had only just died. I had never been so excited for a new chapter. But chapter 120 killed that buzz for me. Instead of finding out all the things that I had listed above, we spent our time reliving memories with only 3 characters, none of whom I'm particularly enthralled by. We'll get into my falling appreciation of Eren as a character in a minute. And chapter 121 has done nothing to revitalize my excitement for this month's chapter. I'll be excited that more Attack on Titan will be coming out, but that feeling of anticipation between chapters 119 and 120 I don't think will ever come back now. Going from did Gabi just kill Eren to a brotherly stroll down memory lane seems a little anticlimactic to me. I just don't care that much if Eren influenced Grisha to kill the Race family. It's cool, but I've never particularly cared for Grisha or Zeke as characters, so it just comes off a little boring to me. But to front-load the video with negative hot takes here, let's go over what I just alluded to when I said that Eren had been worsened as a character by these last 2 chapters.
You standing over the stove talking about you really know crack. Crack is what a skull do. So if someone
the community narrative around Eren's character has been nearly as dynamic as the series' general reputation. It's almost identical. For a long time, especially in the early days, it was just accepted that Eren was a generic bad main character, like every short dark-haired Shinji clone in anime. And this was somewhat true for the first 90 chapters, but the narrative has shifted in the last few years, just like the narrative around the series has shifted in general. Suddenly Eren was the most interesting protagonist anyone had ever seen. Funnily enough, the only thing Isayama had to do to make Eren interesting as a protagonist was to have him stop being our protagonist. When we see him for the first time post-time skip, he's erratic and mysterious. He transforms into a Titan 3 times in a row with little difficulty and is acting extremely unlike himself. This made him infinitely more interesting than he had ever been in the past, and was refreshing to an audience that had watched side character after side character evolve into far more interesting characters than our rather mediocre protagonist. Since this transformation in his character, everyone including myself have touted how great his character had become. But I feel with hindsight all this praise hinged on the mystery factor. We had no idea why he was doing what he was doing, and half the time we didn't even know what he was doing outright. We didn't know his motivation, and guessing why he'd say he hated Mikasa and why he'd work with Zeke was the most enjoyable thing about his character. But now we seemingly have our answers, and it turns out he's been a boring prick the entire time. It seems now that Eren is simply being set up to be the generic big bad that all our actual heroes will have to overcome, and I seem to be the only one disappointed by this. Before we delve into this conversation any deeper, I think it's imperative to give the obvious disclaimer that Isayama probably could have another swerve he's holding on to regarding Eren's character, that will redeem everything he's done and everything he's going to do. But it seems like currently Eren's final role is going to be to unite Marley and Eldia against him when he activates the rumbling, forcing all of our characters we love from Pieck to Hanji to team up and take him out. Now, a way to redeem Eren in this scenario is if he pulls an Itachi and is knowingly doing all of these terrible things and sacrificing his life and reputation for the greater good, to bring the world together and to end the conflict by making himself the almighty target. Or maybe it'll be an ironic thing after everyone has defeated Eren and Armin reflects on the situation, admitting that inadvertently Eren had saved the world by sacrificing his own freedom. But I think it's most likely that Gabi talk no jutsus him into redemption. But doesn't having Eren just be the bad guy make him retroactively uninteresting in all those chapters? It's a really cool idea in my opinion to have our protagonist of 90 chapters turn into the final antagonist. But if we accept this, Eren went from being a one-note good guy to a one-note bad guy. He's not as complicated as we thought as he's presented now. Personally, I'm holding on to hope that Isayama does have another plot twist related to Eren's character in the pipeline, otherwise Eren really never did become that interesting or that good of a protagonist. I now want to transition that last point about the state of Eren's character into a much larger and more general point about the series and the fandom as a whole. What your opinion on everything I just said might come down to how much you believe in Hajime Isayama. That's what all this comes down to. How much do you believe in Isayama's genius? This is the million-dollar question, because if you do have absolute belief in Isayama, then of course there's another plot twist coming, but I don't know if I'm entirely sold on Isayama being an all-knowing genius yet. Not to the extent that everyone else seems to have been. But before we deep dive into that conversation, let me get the last of my negativity out of the way. This is a bad cliffhanger. It doesn't get me excited for the next chapter at all. Again, I'm going to be excited when the chapter comes out because more Attack on Titan is coming out, but there's no tension here. Obviously, euthanasia isn't happening, and even if somehow it does happen, it'll be undone before the end of the series. It just wouldn't make sense for the ultimate resolution of this series to be Zeke euthanizing the Eldian race. It's insulting to the audience's intelligence that Isayama would think he could mislead us into thinking that it could happen, which is what he's trying to do here. He's trying to create tension surrounding whether euthanasia will or won't happen, and nobody is falling for it. Besides that, Ymir's powers are entirely undefined and so are Eren's at this point, so proper speculation on what happens next is effectively impossible. What happens if Eren does get to her? Can he stop her? We know he somehow will, so why even bother with these questions? To reiterate, this is a bad cliffhanger. Now let's move on to a more general discussion about Isayama.
My lap, that's the heat package. I'm from a hood where we beat rappers. These pussy ass niggas.
How much you've enjoyed these last two chapters could also hinge on how much credit you're willing to give Hajime Isayama. Did he foreshadow things in this chapter, back in chapter 1? Has he had everything planned out since the very beginning? Because if he has, then it's undisputable. He's a god. But I think maybe people are giving him too much credit for coincidences and him subtly manipulating certain things. But I'm not sure which side I'm on in this debate. Some things make me think he's not as much of a forward-thinking god as many believe, and some things have me believing he's smarter than anyone gives him credit for. And trust me, they give him plenty credit. So to break this down and discuss this, I have two examples that I'll use to argue both sides and see which we lean towards more. First, let's argue for the Isayama isn't that smart camp. Did Grisha see future Zeke and Eren in Chapter 1 in this very panel? This is the claim I take most issue with from the Isayama as a genius camp. Did he intentionally frame Grisha like this in this panel, or did he capitalize on a coincidence, and are we giving him maybe too much credit in retrospect? I'm not saying it's impossible that Isayama knew time travel would always be a part of his story, and knew that in this moment Grisha would have some sort of time-related epiphany, but to freak out and say that he must have known the exact circumstances is laughable. There's no way. He must have known that time travel would always exist in his series. The first chapter teases this in multiple ways. The title and Eren's dream with long and short-haired Mikasa are evidence of this. Something's afoot here, but I certainly don't think that he had it all idiosyncratically planned out. Time travel has been discussed in the Attack on Titan theory community since the anime came out. I remember watching watching this video by the Offshoot Comics guys when I was like 12 years old, and it blew everything I knew out of the water. I'll link this video in the description. Watching it again not only gave me massive nostalgic feelings, but I watched a bunch of their other videos from the time. But it's interesting to watch them theorize and read the old comments while remembering all the theories we came up with back in the day. Remember that leak ending we all freaked out about? That shit wasn't true at all. Plus, there's an additional reason why the framing of this panel could be coincidental, and that's right after this panel there's a similar panel of Carla in that exact same position with her eyes cropped off. And I don't think future Zeke or Eren made themselves known to Carla in this situation, so it seems like this type of framing was a little running motif Isayama had in Chapter 1, and this motif fits nicely and coincidentally into the grander picture that Isayama may or may not have intended. But even despite this, it's clear that Isayama planned the time travel angle since the series' inception. Now let's argue the other side. This is where things really get interesting. In the writing of this script and the editing of this video, I've increasingly bought into the Isayama is a genius narrative, and it's because of the number 9, and how it symbolically is everywhere in Attack on Titan, from the very, very beginning. This number might just prove that we should give Isayama benefit of the doubt in all coincidences going forward. The number 9 has major significance in Attack on Titan, as I'll soon explain, and this comes from the significance of the number in Norse mythology, which Attack on Titan takes much inspiration from. I have no idea what the significance of number 9 is in Norse mythology. I just googled it and read a paragraph or something about the number 9 being related to the 9 worlds or something, but this is all irrelevant. 9s are everywhere in Attack on Titan, and this is where it drew inspiration from. The first and most obvious example of something to do with 9 in Attack on Titan is the 9 Titan Shifters. Originally there were 9 Titan Shifters created when Ymir died, but now and forever there can only be 7 since Eren has triple dipped, and I don't think there's any way to split Titan Shifters after they've been combined. But again, that's irrelevant. There were originally 9 shifters. More than this, there were originally 9 survivors of the Battle of Shinganshina. This is the thing I kept note of for years, but never had any reason to bring it up. And I don't think I've seen anyone actually put this together. Eren, Mikasa, Armin, Levi, Hanji, Jean, Connie, Sasha, and Floch all survived the battle. Exactly 9 scouts. That's why the narrative needed Floch to survive the battle. Isayama wanted to keep this motif running, and knew that at least some important characters had to die in the conflict. That's why Erwin and Marlowe died, but Floch survived. For the 9. Part 1 of our story concluded in chapter 90, and this is also the chapter where Eren, as we've learned in this most recent chapter, saw everything. But more than these clever motifs and little parallels, how does this prove Isayama was a genius and had it all planned from the start? Well, get ready for this. Attack on Titan Chapter 1 was released on the 9th of September 2009. In other words, the 9th of the 9th, 09. Not only that, but the 9th page of the first chapter released on the 9th of the 9th, 09 is when we are first introduced to Eren and he wakes up from his supposed dream and notes the 2 different versions of Mikasa he's just seen. The first 8 pages were spent on Erwin's scouting party as they fight a Titan. On page 9 this happens. Isayama clearly knew from the beginning that the number 9 was going to be significant and has mirrored this since chapter 1. This leads insight into the creative process and could be used to demonstrate that these otherwise would-be coincidences are actually part of his master plan. But if you'll excuse me, I've got a few more 9s to get to. The tree Eren is supposedly dreaming in front of has 9 branches, and the way Eren is positioned in front of it is clearly foreshadowing of him becoming the coordinate. Also on this page from chapter 1 there are 9 of these wall things. Oh, and chapter 9 is where Eren is revealed to not only be alive, but to be a Titan shifter. 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. They're everywhere in Attack on Titan. There has to absolutely have been thought put into this aspect of the series since its inception. I also tried to find a correlation or a connection in every chapter divisible by 9, but I couldn't find a connection. So brave commenters, it's now your job to comb the series and look for the 9s everywhere you can and report back in the comment section of this video with your findings. Let's keep the positivity train going and talk about something I liked from this chapter, the reoccurring law of context within Attack on Titan. The law of context in Attack on Titan is one of the series' strongest aspects. Isayama first presents an event with a certain context, like initially with the example in this chapter, where the Race family is slaughtered by Grisha. When we first saw this scene, it was presented as Grisha murders the Race family in order to steal their Titan powers. Then we got additional context in chapter 90 where Eren learns that his father begged and tried to reason with Frida, but when she refused he had to steal the power as a last resort, to save the people within the walls, only for us to then learn in this chapter that even after realizing that this was his last resort, Grisha couldn't bring himself to kill the family, only for Eren to manipulate him through time and convincing him to carry out the killing. See, the context around this scene changes throughout the series. This happens consistently throughout Attack on Titan, and it's great. These sorts of narrative tools make the audience recontextualize everything about the scene they thought they once knew, and makes rewatches more rewarding as a second-time viewer can smirk upon and reflecting about how all of this comes together in the end. It's a recognition between audience member and the creator that something clever has happened. Other examples of this, if you're having trouble following, would be the Colossal Titan and Armored Titan's original attack on the walls. At first, the audience believes them to be mindless creatures attacking the walls. Then we learn that they are intelligent, then we learn that the Titans can be shifters, and Armin puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that the Armored and Colossal Titans must be shifters as well. Then we find out the identity of these Titans is our boys Reiner and Bertolt, which recontextualizes everything when you think of how old they must have been at the time and their interactions with all of our characters. Then we learn that they actually didn't have any say in what they were doing and were being controlled by a larger military and a larger nation. That's real motivation behind the attack was not to wipe out humanity. This story was never about the survival of humanity. It was an allegory for US imperialism because Mali only wanted paradise for its resources. And somewhere all of this fits and doesn't contradict anything that came before it previously. And Isayama would have had to have known what was going to happen step by step for all of this to have worked. Otherwise, all the additional context he gives for previous scenes wouldn't fit properly, and instead of me praising them as genius in this video, we'd be talking about him retconning everything. See Naruto as a chief example of how to fumble this concept. The reveal that Black Zetsu actually planned everything from the beginning didn't go over too well. Now, I didn't think the example of the context law in this chapter was all that great. But again, this is for personal reasons. I don't really care if Grisha was a moral actor in this situation. I didn't really care about Zeke's reaction to this, since I really don't care about either one of their characters. And not to bring up what I've already gone over, but I don't like the direction this twist seems to be making regarding Eren's character. So I may not necessarily like the direction, but this chapter once again demonstrates one of Isayama's finest qualities regarding manipulating context surrounding certain events. Now let's move on and briefly go over the time travel aspect of this character. I'm going to stay out of this conversation completely, because I think at the current time any conversation regarding this subject is pointless. Either it'll be stupid and forced, or Isayama will find a cute way to explain it in an upcoming chapter. The point being, we couldn't possibly make a judgment yet. All the speculation happening right now is going to be nearly immediately outdated and irrelevant. That's all I want to say about time travel, so let's finish off the video by talking about 2 specific grander topics in Attack on Titan, these being how long we have left and Annie. Let's start by talking about Annie. A common talking point I've seen in the community surrounding this chapter is that even if Annie comes back now, she couldn't possibly have any relevance. This is a laughably stupid thing to think. This topic and what I'm going to discuss next were both originally planned to be spag videos on my old channel, like the Jägermaster Plan video, which I will be re-uploading tomorrow if anyone's curious. But I've decided to include them here in this video. The spag videos were a theory series that I had planned to do on all things Attack on Titan. One was going to be about Annie's larger role in Attack on Titan, that we'll be discussing right now, and then we'll end the video by discussing how many chapters of Attack on Titan we have left, which was going to be another different video. But in regards to Annie, there must be a significant purpose for Annie to still be alive. If there wasn't, she would have just been killed off, but she wasn't, and if Isayama really wanted us all to forget about her, he shouldn't have teased her return around every possible corner, which he has done. So what is her grander purpose in the narrative, and why is she still alive? Well, the original point of the spag video was going to be that Annie and her family, or at least her father, were working with some sort of third-party entity, and I had 2 primary pieces of evidence for this. Firstly, Annie is framed separately from the other warriors whenever a group shot of them is shown. She's always positioned facing away from the group or with her back to the group. This framing of her is intentional by Isayama to show the disconnect she seems to be having with her contemporaries. Besides all this, she never seemed to be invested and never particularly seemed to believe in the Mali cause. The second piece of evidence was the speech her father gives her seemingly before she left for paradise. In this speech, he tells her to persist even if the entire world turns against her. Now, this makes sense when we first hear this speech. At the time, we thought the walls were the world, so this statement makes sense. But with all the context we have now, most of the world should have been on her side if she was simply attacking Paradis, unless she was working for a third party. So why would the whole world turn against her for something that they necessarily want to happen? They don't like paradise. So this seems to not make sense at all in the grander context, even if it did initially. And every time when I got to this point in my theory, I always doubted myself. I didn't think there was enough time to introduce a third party into this Marley vs. Eldir conflict, since we are clearly in the end game. But after this chapter, it all makes sense. Eren is the third party. He's probably been influencing her and her family since the beginning. Maybe Annie's even interacted with future Eren in her past. That's why she was weird around everyone. That's why she was weird around Eren, because she knew him from the future, and seeing him in the past would have been a weird feeling. That's why, theoretically, the whole world would have been against her, and why she's always been so weird and mysterious. The whole world is against Eren, so therefore the whole world would be against her if they ever got to that point in the plan. Additionally, if we ever get an Annie flashback when she returns revealing all this, I think it'll somehow tie into our little stomping motif we've seen in her character. This seems to be an odd point to bring up here, but if it comes true I want prediction points. There's this weird motif with Annie where she crushes things with a stomp. We've seen it twice, with the grasshopper in Marley, and when she originally did it to Petra in the forest. Again, this is a weird point, but prediction points do make me feel good. So I think we'll get some sort of origin for this weird move she seems to repeat. Now, how she comes back is a different question. It's probably going to be the result of the rumbling happening. Either the rumbling itself is her signal from Eren to wake up, or the rumbling will cause the crystal around her to break open. Obviously, she's my favourite character, so I want her to come back as soon as possible, but I think it's also obvious without my emotional attachment that she has to return and have some major impact on the plot, because otherwise she would have just been killed off. But now let's move on to the final topic of the video and explore exactly how long Attack on Titan has left in its run. Attack on Titan will either end at chapter 130 or 135. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to make this concept into a separate video called How Season 4 of Attack on Titan will adapt the rest of the manga, where I went through in great detail about how many chapters on average go into each episode, and even pinpointed where the first half of Season 4 would end, but I'll give a summary of everything here as quickly as possible. If we follow the math, a 24 to 26 episodes season split over 2 cours just like Season 3 could adapt the rest of the manga if it was 130 chapters long. Hopefully all my math is on screen currently and you can pause if you need some more convincing. Mathematically we don't have much time left, and if we do end at chapter 130, then the final chapter should come out right before the anime of Season 4 comes back. Sad times. I've been keeping up with Attack on Titan at the beginning of every month for the last 5 years, since I was 12 years old. I started reading this series in grade 8, my first year of high school, and here I am now nearly a year removed from graduating and it's nearly over. This is the defining series of my teenage years and it's alarming to me that it's almost over. Attack on Titan is ending soon and it's sorta sad. By the way, I said either chapter 130 or 135 because 135 is the closest number to 130 that's divisible by 9. And I could see that number playing some factor in the number of chapters Attack on Titan has overall. That's our theme for today. 9. So ultimately, if I could summarize this long video in one sentence, it would be, can we just get back to Gabby?